So let me start with my impressions of the conference. And it's not so easy, so first of all, I have to confess that I'm not a real historian of sciences. I'm a historian, and I'm a historian of gender studies, and I'm a historian of knowledge, but not of sciences. But maybe this, so I'm in a position of sharing my impressions with you, and you can refute them or add something or whatever. And what I will do now, I will try to connect different the 2 days and different concepts, and I will mix up everything. What means ideas, concepts, and associations. Maybe you don't like this, but for me it helps me to give an order in this. What very different things we discussed, and very lots of things we learned, and I especially learned from all these interesting presentations. So we start yesterday, first we start with the remarks of Friedrich Hein and Jan Zoman, and I want to start with what my impression is. Friedrich started with the remark of that nothing is stable anymore, and I would say concerning the last debates of political epistemologies, and I will add that this is a good thing to think about, also about the 20s and 30s, and also of the time after the Second World War. Nothing is stable anymore, and I understood many of these projects and ideas and concepts of something looking for how to deal with the world and how to make order in a situation when there are different sorts of order, changings of order. So we started with the 2 presentations from Alexander and Igor concerning how the tensions between new philosophy and the continuation of older ideas, and then we learned something about how new national history will come into this way of dealing with the universal or the university of sciences, and Jan led us with his presentation on architecture to something like a Gesamtkunstwerk. I can't translate this word. Whole art project of the society, and this led us to the very interesting round table about the productive things of art. So I will sum up the first day with 3 important topics: progress, rationality, and Marxism. And in different presentations, they came something like they are not synonyms, but they are connected very strongly together in these presentations, and sometimes they are used like synonyms, and they are contrasted in these presentations: nationalism, universalism, and knowledge. And this, I think, it would be. For me, it was very instructive to learn something about the Ukrainian formalists from Galina, and to use this texture, ideology, and material as something like dealing with progress, rationality, and Marxism in this way of thinking about these ideas also as practices and strategies of inclusion and exclusion. What means also progress, rationality, and Marxism are not only ideas of scientists or historians of science, but also something like strategies of inclusion and exclusion. So then we started today with the very interesting presentation of Anna and about Kula. And now I will do something which is not allowed. I will connect Kula with Anna's presentation with Friedrich's presentation and Sasha's presentation, because they all connected and thought about these international relations. And what I learned from them is that Anna stresses the differences between Kula and the auxiliary sciences, and Sasha stresses the similarities between this institute and the GDR and the institute in West Germany. And this makes me to remember us about the importance of heterogeneity and the differences of strategies, to think about nothing is in all these examples are placed in a broad context, and these contexts always produce different strategies, different concepts, and different places in this maps of thinking. So this is to take the production of science and the production of ideas as a very important thing, and this leads me to the last presentations of Daria and Alexander, and this was because with this presentation I can make another, I can broaden my main terms: progress, rationalism, Marxism, and truth. And I think it is important to add truth, and if we have these four concepts, it is four terms. I'm not sure about whether they are concepts, but terms. They led us through the whole conference, and I think it should be interesting to take them as something we could deal with, like knowledge. And I come to Elkanah, the body of knowledge, the sources of knowledge, and images of knowledge, and would taking Kula's making sense of this. I want to take Kula's peasants and landlords, not Kula's ideas, but the peasants and landlords who made sense of the images of their images of knowledge and transfer them to Marxism, because I think Marxism is something we still have a real black box. And I would say maybe it could help to think about Marxism like images of Marxism, body of Marxism, and sources of Marxism, to analyze, to use this Marxism as something that led us through these days, but also is something like a black box always coming with us. And I would conclude with a remark that I think I let out two presentations, what means Gert's and Alexei's, concerning the transfer of science into public. And I think one of them, what I learned very much is that it is very important to think about this political epistemology of something like a process of transfer of different borders, from subjects, from politics to education, from science to education, and from education to public debate. And maybe this could help to think about further about political epistemologies, and also the death of the intellectual, to think about our own position concerning this fake news and truth debate, and placing our own works in this field of political epistemologies. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Vicky, and
great. So I'm going to start with a similar disclaimer that I've come to this conference as a disciplinary I've come to this conference as a disciplinary outsider. I'm a literary scholar. And, it was only thanks to Jan and Alexander that this semester, if not delved, then keep my toe into the world of political epistemology. So if you take my remarks in the spirit, you know, as an outsider's venture beyond his depth. But you know, there were really many fascinating points that will stay with me. You know, that I learned from the presentations. You know, like for example, Ilya Kukulin's distinguishing between the official collectivist ethos of a number of Soviet poets from the late 30s, from the, you know, more genuine Marxist kind of poetry produced at the time, and also some kind of a post-constructivist verse that was written. You know, so through this act, he actually made Soviet poetry from the 1930s, the late 1930s, really interesting for me, because the typical gesture is to say that after 1934 we have socialist realism, and really the lyric is dead. A little, you know, by the late 1930s the lyric is dead, and you know, by this act of categorization he brought some of these figures to life for me. You know, I similarly appreciated Angelina Urgentu's highlighting of color as a political mobilizing force. You know, and because we typically operate, you know, either in this old opposition of line and color, or modernist line and color, you know, as apolitical versus content, you know, as political and realist. And sometimes, you know, I think line has been appropriated right now for politics, but the fact that she was able to do that for color, you know, seemed to me super productive. And I have really such local remarks, you know, to make of different papers, but I'll try to generalize my comments and maybe towards the end have a reflexive turn and actually turn the optic of political epistemology first on us, you know, so that our own positionality could be exposed before we then could turn to the material each of us is studying. But so I have to admit, maybe given my disciplinary interests, that sometimes you know, maybe the ideas you know, floated a little too high above the ground for me in you know, some presentations without the kind of reference to social material realities you know, our heroes were inhabiting or responding to. And maybe this is, you know, my general difficulty with unadulterated intellectual history, you know, in which intellectual developments in scholarship and culture are seen as exclusively as products of previous intellectual developments and largely independent of the class position or habitus, or call it what you will, of their authors. And especially, you know, it is difficult to discuss Marxist philosophy, you know, which Gramsci really successfully redefined as a philosophy of praxis. You know, it was supposed to be, you know, in Utopian language, but I think it's really very meaningful definition. You know, Marxist philosophy is only with great difficulty contained within this pure and uncontaminated intellectual history, with no reference to social factors. You know, as one way, you know, that one very obvious way, in fact, such grounding of political epistemologies could take place through the figure of the intelligentsia. This is what the last panel demonstrated very well. And intelligentsia, is very convenient, since on the one hand its members are simultaneously responsible for scholarly and cultural production, while inhabiting at the same time the realm of material, social, and political life. And I'll try, time probably not allowing, but for 5 minutes to take it left, to show how some of the political epistemologies of post-socialist intelligentsia constrain our knowledge production. I hope that this will be in one way or another relevant to us. But the perils of using intelligentsia as a unit of analysis are to clear. Our conversation will go, of course, towards clarifying a definition, then we'll get into historical debates which have been one way or another waged since the late 19th century, and so we'll be in some way repeating them. There's also much emotion, trauma, investment, defense, to make sober analysis more difficult. For my purposes, I define post-socialist intelligentsia, which may be a category more relevant to some of us than to others. It's a matter of ideology, a shared cultural memory, self-identification. It is an act of inscription of the self into a historical tradition that stretches from the Decembrists through the Шестидесятники, the later dissidents. And it is precisely this act of belonging that allows us to treat it as a unitary imagined community and generalize, at least about its dominant sections. And paradoxically, in the post-socialist world, there are two very, very different economic categories of people who claim membership in the intelligentsia. On the one hand, teachers, university or school teachers, museum workers, mostly state-supported and fully paid cultural workers. And on the other hand, such status is also claimed by media specialists, consultants, cultural curators and magazines who have tapped into an entirely different source of financing, would be usually called the creative class. Regardless of their particular class position, these vast differences that I illustrated, the dominant section of the post-socialist intelligentsia politically identified as Democrats in the 1990s and probably as liberals afterwards. So I'll, in the remaining probably minute, I'll identify 3 characteristics of what Karl Marx calls the political style of the intelligentsia, namely anti-populism, Western centrism, and anti-utopianism. And if I had more time, I would be happy to show how each of these features, acquired in the process of the discursive struggles of the intelligentsia against the Soviet regime, plays significant and yet underanalyzed limits on the field of intellectual and cultural production in the post-socialist period. But I'd be happy to talk a lot more. But
yeah, well,
No chance.
okay. You would be interested, but
so if anybody has in the question and answer section questions about any of these, anti-populism, Western centrism, and anti-utopianism on the way they affect intellectual production.
We should have a discussion about that. Oh, thank you, Rossi. Still a discussion round and if someone will ask you based on the discussion round, then I will let you speak longer. But now I literally pass the microphone very first to us that I speak.
Okay. Thank you, Jan. Really, first of all, I want to thank you for the letter because it was a wonderful event. It's a really intellectual pleasure. Okay, maybe because I just finished to put grades to my students, so now I have my free to think and to discuss and to have this joy of intellectual activity. But really, it's very interesting to hear all these presentations because I learned a lot here. It was very interesting, very inspiring. And maybe because, well, it's not about well-known subjects, and you were able to put light on very different persons, maybe not very discussed in literature, not very mainstream, but so we can understand how life was in the Soviet culture, in the Eastern Europe culture during the Soviet period. But there was really reflection about science, about ideology, and so on. But I would like to maybe to make a question to all of you, because I came here maybe with some expectations about what political epistemology is. And now I'm wondering, is it really epistemology, the political epistemology? Because coming in some sense from historical epistemology, or from one type of historical epistemology, there are a lot of. I'm used to think about like historical conditions of knowledge, so how knowledge can be subject to different historical situations, cultural situations, political situations. So I expected to hear more maybe about science and knowledge in general to be subject to political ideology. What I really learned here, it was about how science was used in political discourse, how science was used in order to create political mythology, if I can use this word. For example, about progress and future, about role of technology, about improvement, and so on. So these words maybe the main idea I really saw in all presentations. How we can use science in order to create some political agendas and research and so on. For me, maybe it's not so a lot about the science itself. Okay, maybe we can go back to Yuval Kama and use his distinctions between body of knowledge, images of knowledge, and so on. Okay, we can say, well, body of knowledge is something that we can divide with different, from Eastern Europe and Western Europe. It might be all about the same body of knowledge, but we have very different images of knowledge. But I turn to the text itself, to Yuval Kama, and so, well, he's speaking about like truth conditions and source of knowledges, sources of knowledge, well, about type of theories we can use to what we are going to use science to explain or to describe and so on. So I thought maybe it's not so big difference between Marxist epistemology and non-Marxist epistemology, because we saw very clearly that there was there were lots of connections between Eastern Europe and Western Europe, and it seems to be the same science in the center of enterprise. The same idea of unified science. Yes, maybe it's kind of a common European project of scientific knowledge, because these people, they were able to communicate and to create the same societies, to create journals, to participate in the same meetings. So it wasn't about differences in the type of argumentation, in the scientific rigor, in other scientific styles, but maybe more about ideological applications of science. So for what we are using scientific knowledge, what type of scientific knowledge is important for society. And this maybe it's not the part of, it's maybe kind of next question, not the part of images of knowledge, but this third part, of norms and values, which Elkanah put like a bit apart from images of knowledge, like ideologies, political considerations, social pressures, values, norms, and so on. So maybe we still have the same, more or less, I confess, maybe not exactly the same image of science, image of knowledge in the Marxist and not Marxist Europe, but in many points they have these similar considerations of science. So again, I have a question: what is really epistemological about political epistemology, and how really Marxist ideology can influence our strategies and argumentations in scientific research? Should we really keep this name, political epistemology, or should we look for some other type of name for this enterprise? Thank you.
Thank you, Daria. And since we are around the table, not a Q&A, I will not answer any of the questions and topics raised, but open the floor for discussions and for other comments.
I'll start with something very modest. I mean, when Wilson invoked the notion of acts of belonging, and then a moment later invoked proletarian, I immediately started thinking not of ideology and utopia, but of his slightly earlier work on generations. And I'm wondering, where he talks about and where he's puzzling over the problem of, not how do you use, say, some complex construal of statistics to talk about how to cluster people in time, but rather how do you come up with a reasonable basis with which to talk about shared themes, right? It doesn't have to be that you and I are the same age, although it does work out that way, right? But how do you then talk about generation? And I then wanted to turn that to Daria and ask whether, I realize it's a bit of a stretch because French intellectuals don't pay attention to things outside of France, but forgive me. But I am actively curious about whether the notion of generations in Mannheim's sense ever comes into play in these debates, in terms of your larger project about the typologies of the French intellectual. So I don't know if do you have something to say to each other in that regard, or am I taking you off the track you were intending?
Yes, I'm familiar with Markheim's work on generations, but to be honest, I cannot think anything immediately to respond.
Okay. Yes. According to the last work written by French historian his name is Michel Blanc. Iran came into power. So I think it kind of strange genealogy, and it was what is really important. It was elaborated, not it was not linked with the theory of Karl Mannheim. So as it happens, the Frenchmen they just didn't know about it, and so they just neglected it themselves. So yes, the problem of different generations in the problematic of genealogy of French intellectuals is a really important one. And in my previous project, I am trying to distinguish, to point out this problem also, because, for example, Henri Barbusse and Louis Aragon, they were on the same generation because they participated in the battles during the First World War. But historically, the first one, Henri Barbusse, he's more of this generation of Lefeu, generation of the First World War, and Louis Aragon, he made his career as public intellectual in interwar period. So they were approximately of the same. Yes, they both took part in the war, but they from this Minox genealogy, they're not in the same generation of intellectuals. So it's an interesting question.
Maybe just make a response. So, Mannheim's main point is that generations are defined by a significant event that took place at a particular age of one cohort, especially the late 80s, early 20s, when we went through the war. That's kind of going to define that whole cohort. But the interesting thing about the history of intellectuals or intelligentsia is its complete discontinuity. We have certain very prominent generations, 68ers, but then, at least in the Soviet context, there's much less to say about the 40s or the mid 50s. Then the 60s come, and then 60s come in certain prominence, then maybe perestroika comes in certain prominence. So it's a history of discontinuities which really favor certain periods over others. So maybe both the category of intellectuals and generations tend to leave certain historical periods, fairly empty, periods in which intellectuals or the intelligentsia weren't significant historical actors, so did not constitute themselves as a coherent, unified cohort.
The final question, should we look for some new form of knowledge? I was thinking more along the lines of how to empower knowledge creation, and specifically moving forward to the knowledge society or the knowledge economy, and the need for, kind of the communist ideologies or Marxism or these frames of thoughts to update their definition of the worker as more and more people become, let's say, knowledge workers, or however they want to be called. And specifically how to enable, like what kind of platform or political forms of empowerment or just practical means there are for knowledge creation, because it will become a much more democratized and widespread process.
For this observation, maybe it still sounds for me more like social history, social logical analysis of the issue of knowledge creation. The question is still is it changed the style of knowledge itself, the style of science itself, or you just okay, we can apply the discourse about intellectual activity of workers or scientists to be a worker, like intellectual worker, to any kind of society where the science is significant and very established, socially established enterprise. So for me, maybe it would be kind of external analysis of science, not the analysis of internal structure of knowledge. Am I right?
Yes, but I think that there's a definite symbiosis between the paradigms of knowledge creation, the knowledge created, and the people creating the knowledge. So as we discover new theories or new forms of knowledge, or we transform our paradigms, I think the two are interlinked. I think the external and the internal are interlinked. And I think it's because we are living in and we're moving towards, the digitization, and there's sort of like a continuum between the knowledge in our minds and, its codification directly into some digital form, between the human and the machine, removing the majority of material production. And yeah, I don't even know how to think about it, but I think the two are interlinked.
Could I make a small comment to your question? It's a very interesting question. Actually, we were discussing a little bit with Dasha. So my question will be, don't you think that this problem of knowing something in the history of science during the Soviet Union, it's also the problem of the imagining of the future? So it's the case we know something, want to know something, and why we want to know. During the history of Soviet Union, it works like that we have the precise image of what future will be like. And now actually the crisis of the probably contemporary society we live in is that we have no image of the future. And that influences the way we want to know something, or we know something, or we discover something. Just a kind of idea.
Well, in this context, do you think there is a big difference between futuristic conceptions of science and Marxist conceptions of science? It's just I'm wondering.
Yeah, I think it depends on which aspect we take. In pragmatic aspect, there are a lot of similarities, but in aesthetic aspect, other aspects, there are a lot of differences. I mean, the strategy of imagining the future in its pragmatic.
So there are different images.
Yes, so I can't answer.
But I think that's the point, that it's a new industrial revolution, And so the image of the utopia or whatever is possible from this industrial revolution and the valuation of the production and so forth will be slightly different. And I don't think we have that yet. And also because we're starting to experiment with all new forms of currencies, digital currencies based on even non-material values. Like, I think that's what needs to be addressed. Like the whole, and so I think there's definitely a difference between Marxism and futurism, because at the time of the Marxists, it was just a different paradigm. And so of course we can have new forms of electrification, but someone needs to actually create the terms and talk about what professions, make a new set of professions of the people that are in the digital realm or the knowledge workers. And we just need to do everything again that we've been talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and a small comment, and it's very interesting that actually they know this history, all these processes that are in Europe shows that like in 100 years actually we have the same like question with modernism and all this nationalism, racism and so on. So like we are coming back, like we didn't solve it before. So it's very interesting too between these questions of ideology, knowledge, so they like up to solve on some example.
Yeah, that turns into
just three-person participation by the other.
That turns into exactly today. So are there? Gareth.
Ties a little bit into the last discussion, I think, because perhaps one diagnosis of the current times could be that we no longer have very explicit or conscious ideological compasses in terms of where we think we're going, etc. And I think that forms a very strong contrast with the historical periods that we've been looking at these days, in which ideology was, abundant and everywhere, and came in many shapes and forms, etc. And then I've just, during the last half hour, trying to wrap my head around the whole workshop, which is very hard because I'm very tired, as all of you are, so, and it was a very diverse set of papers. But one of the things I think that really struck me in the end is the very explicit presence of ideology in a lot of the cases that we've been studying. Now, if you take the concept of political epistemology, or the analysis of the politics of knowledge and that sort of thing, right? Which started at least at the places that I'm aware of in the 1970s and 1980s as a way to sort of study the micropolitics of science, or make explicit the implicit politics of scientific practices, of certain creations of knowledge, etc. So these studies were often very much about the sort of implicit politics, or the politics with a lowercase p. Maybe Kula, in a sense, is an example of that. How metrology and the use of these measurement vessels actually embody particular political choices, right? So you tease these out. What struck me in the papers that we've seen over these 2 days is that the politics is extremely explicit most of the time. Things are highly ideological. People, swing around with these labels all the time. Now, whether the two match, of course, is a different question. Whether if somebody claims something is Trotskyist is actually, also following an implicit politics with the lowercase p that matches onto that. I think that's sort of an open question. So, in a sense, we need to study these things at both levels. But what struck me, and that's, I think, partly because I'm from Western Europe, so I'm used to a tradition of science studies where the politics you tease out is always an implicit one, is that we're dealing here with highly ideologized case studies, either because they're in the Soviet Union, or because we're dealing with intellectuals that explicitly take ideological stances, etc. And to me, that's a way in which this workshop was very different and special from the sort of stuff that I'm used to. And it raises its own set of questions, one of which is, like I just tried to stipulate, I think, how does the politics with capital P match onto the politics with the lowercase p? And maybe, I don't have answers to that, but I think it's something to further tease out.
I grew up 20 kilometers from the border to the GDR, and the war sort of ended there. And inviting me to this conference, I noticed that there are so many things behind this curtain that we still do not see in the normal discussions of our discipline. So we could go and analyze this from the outside and say, okay, we didn't have enough funds for translations, and we didn't have probably enough conferences like this, and we can have an outside perspective, but I would still think that there is something inside the way our epistemology gears us, that shows us just particular things. And I can see that it's probably, with these case studies that we had, not the most promising way to look at it as these thought collectives that are constituted by the things they cannot see. But that's, I mean, that will be the epistemology of the thought collective that is somehow forced to highlight only certain things in societies. And this political epistemology, I guess, still a bit of an anti-term, but history of science coming to a certain point of nervousness when the outside and the politics seems to slip away everything that we thought was sort of guaranteed, and that we have this decline in political cultures all around the globe, and that political epistemologies, I think, a way of trying to react to that, and maybe we were still not at the point where we can say this is the best way of conducting history of science in times like these. But I think it's probably more of an inner disciplinary issue that it's really important for, at least as I see it, to think about these, probably the things that we do not touch and that we do not see because of our methodologies that might be very, very interesting. For example, digital data problems, or the way new digitized surveillance sort of affects us, and all these kinds of things. So probably it's good to look at it from the outside and the inside at the same time.
So, if there are no more immediate questions, then I would actually turn to Friedrich, to Alexander, to me, so that we can basically say thank you and maybe say in a few sentences what we've learned and what we do with political epistemologies. And I will be the one finishing it.
You also have the possibility to say that you don't want to say anything.
Shall I start?
Yeah.
All right. Start to start.
Yeah, well, also maximum 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. Well, these past, 2 times 9 hours we spent together were extremely broad in topics and discussions and things that came up that were, at least as I look at it from our joint introduction, always somehow connected to what we try to frame as political epistemologies, and that we perhaps, or also I, did not frame very or too neat or perhaps too open. That might have been a problem, but this is like an observation, or I think that that's a problem, or the initial problem for that has been mentioned here right now that political epistemology seems to make sense to everybody somehow, and everybody has to can somehow react to that and attach to it with material or concept, but still there is no. I think there were several concepts or ideas of what political epistemology might be still around, and this is, I think, this is what I take from this from these from the workshop, that we have to, or that looking at or thinking about the next workshop in October, we have to still get a lot of conceptual work done, and perhaps also think about the terms we use. So this would be my short thing, or putting quite briefly together what I take from here, apart from a lot of factual knowledge about all these things that were presented, and for which I also think everybody who presented. So I learned a lot, and as now two local organizers, which will be local organizers who have the final words, I will take the chance for all us guests to thank you for organizing everything, for being available via email beforehand, and putting up everything also. Who guided us here from the hotel, and this is perhaps something that you would do. So thank you very much, and yeah, that's what it's really.
I suppose maybe not the very end, but I have to sample also the words of thankful for Alexander Kolesnik, Alexei Pleshkov, who is also here, and Ian, Anton, and Sasha, who gives the picture for us, for his help and any kind of assistance. Thank you very, very much. I suppose we have also possibility to continue our discussion for the next conferences, and maybe not so optimistic. For me, more interesting and more fruitful would be the for our today discussion the interesting of fresh decline. For example, for me, the history of STS, and especially Bloor and Barnes program, would be very, very interesting to explain, maybe by the tools of political epistemology also, because for me it's also very a lot of affinities between our program and this first step to combine politics of knowledge, activity, epistemology, and another kind of question about teachings about symmetry, reflexivity, and so on, and that end of European thought of late the 70s or the 80s is also maybe very interesting and intriguing for us. But I hope we can avoid some of this that end, but it's some kind of challenge. Thank you.
Now finish it. I don't know whether I will finish political epistemology or just the conference. Three very brief thoughts. The first is about politics and politics with capital P and small p. I mean, another politics of politics with difference. There is something what I kind of learned throughout this conference is that well, I miss the politics with small p in many designs, and I really liked you know, that also depends on how you frame your research and which question you ask to your materials. And I would encourage. So it seems to me that for example, questioning history of science, it's interesting to have the look from outside. So kind of, you know, still some history is taught here for me to internalist, and internalist history seems to me that it kind of predefines the politics you are using then as the politics, as a politics of the big instead of if you would have kind of socialized view from the sociology, So, turning around the question, then we will have more politics with small p, and I think that's methodologically that's the road to follow. And also, well, the question of Marxism and epistemology. Yeah, we still think about thought collectives rather, and as soon as Marxism didn't have epistemology. Even if some Marxists thought so, but that was a political gesture. So for us, epistemology is always, localized, always small-based, and appears and disappears very fast. So I think that's also something we have to tackle with. It's the question that everybody understands something different with epistemology, and that I find interesting challenge for us. And at some point of time, 2 weeks ago, I pointed out that there is a variety of political epistemology concepts, but the first book with political epistemology in title is scheduled to be published 2013, in 12 years' time. So we have more or less 12 years to figure out what we understand as political epistemology, and then I hope it will be clearer. And with this, I think I cannot read my third point. But since I cannot read it, I would say that I will come. So first of all, I wanted to thank all the participants for being here, for coming to Moscow, for being here also to non-participants who participated as publics, for joining us on probably the most beautiful days in Moscow we had in this year. So thank you for your discussions. And then to conclude with Reinhard Kleber quoting Stephen Shaping, scholars, since we are looking with political epistemology at ideas which were shaped by people with bodies, let's also agree that we also have bodies and that we need a kind of Stärkung in the German sense. And with this, the next point of the program is the Café Pio, when we can recollect our bodies again. Thank you.